Our first keynote is a quintessential Canadian and international leader, Bob Rae, the ambassador and permanent representative of Canada to the United Nations in New York. Bob Rae is a Privy Councillor, a Companion of the Order of Canada, and a member of the Order of Ontario. He has numerous awards and honorary degrees from institutions in Canada and around the world, and is the author of 5 books, in addition to several government reports. Along with music, reading, and writing, he loves tennis, golf, and fishing. Joining Mr. Rae to moderate this chat is Jane McCullin, partner and lead of the National People and Organization Practice with our sponsor, PwC Canada. Again, we will have some time for audience questions, so please be sure to input yours into the chat box beside your main stage screen. Over to you, Jane.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. My name is Jean McClellan, and I am from PwC. Thank you again for joining us. We have a wonderful and informative session today. As was indicated, we'll have a brief presentation from Ambassador Rae, and then we'll move right into those questions. So we want to save lots of time for that Q&A. So feel free to submit those questions as they come to you through the Q&A console. So look at that bottom right-hand side of your screen, and we'll try to get to as many of those as possible. So so again, Ambassador Rae needs no introduction. He's been the ambassador and permanent representative of Canada in the United Nations in New York since 2020. He served as the Premier for Ontario and the leader of the Liberal Party, and has been elected to the federal and provincial parliaments 11 times through 1978 to 2013. And so I think we could probably both of us could probably reflect on that amazing history and all of the wonderful things that he's done in his public and private career. But without further ado, let's have Ambassador Rae join the stage, and we'll get to his speaking notes, and then we'll come back for that question session. Ambassador Rae, over to you.
Thank you very much, Jean. It's good to be with everybody in this somewhat odd universe in which we're all living, but I'm delighted to have a chance to chat with you. Just to give you the full context, I'm speaking to you from the mission of the UN in New York. And the room that I'm in is actually called the Stephen Lewis Room. So Ambassador Lewis was here in the 80s. I succeeded him as leader of the NDP in Ontario, and now I've succeeded him as ambassador to the UN. So I'm really, really delighted to have the opportunity to share some thoughts and perspectives with you. And the focus of my comments is very much about the importance of leadership, the relevance of leadership, and how it continues to play such a strong role in the choices that we make as individuals, and the choices that we make working in organizations or working in governments of all kinds across the country. And my first thought is to always remind people that it was a great analyst of public opinion many years ago, Walter Lippmann, who talked about the pictures in our heads, and how the pictures in our heads have a really big influence on what we think, and also how we present concepts and ideas to each other. And I think still the picture of leaders and leadership is still pretty much a world where the leader is in front of us. The leader is sort of above us. And unfortunately, still persisting in many people's heads is the idea that the leader is a white guy. And I think that this is something that has to change in the way in which we perceive and think about leadership. So we have to keep working on how we change the pictures in our heads about what leadership is really all about. The second thing is that there's still a sense, I think, that people have, is that leaders are other people. Leaders are not me. They're what others do. I don't think of myself. The word is, I don't think of myself as a leader. I I think of someone else as being a leader, or the leader is always the person who talks first in the room, or who talks the loudest, or who makes the biggest sort of initial impression. Those are also ideas I think we have to get rid of as much as we can, because it really doesn't reflect the reality of the world that we're living in today, and the reality of Canada, the reality of that we see all around us in the world. And so I want to try to talk about leadership in a way that I hope will make sense to you. It's based on my experience of having watched others as leaders, some good, some not so good, watched myself try to be a leader in various ways, for better or for worse, sometimes successfully, sometimes not successfully. And a couple of lessons that I hope we can draw from that, and then to talk in the end quite a lot about the importance of what I call the 2 Ps, patience and persistence, which are absolutely essential qualities for successful leadership. So first of all, to kind of cut to the chase right away, what a leader is not. A leader is not a prophet. A leader is also not entirely a manager. There are elements of prophecy, if you like, that can be features of leadership, but it's wrong to think that by definition, a leader is somebody who's far ahead of the crowd, way out there, and speaking to us from the mountaintop, but never really coming down to be one of us. And I think that leadership is not those things. It's not prophecy, because while it takes strength of character to be a leader and to be a prophet, while it takes clarity of vision to be a leader and not a prophet, while it takes resilience to be a leader and a prophet, the reality is that the difference between leaders and prophets is, and this may sound, I'm not making a joke when I say this, leaders actually have followers. And in order to be a successful leader, you have to have followers. If you are the brave soul who's way ahead of his time or her time, and she's just too far ahead for anybody to say, well, that's where I want to be too, or that's where I am. We often speak about how, what a wonderful leader that person is. Or if the leader happens to go through a period of great unpopularity, you say, well, that's simply a reflection of their success and quality as a leader. And actually, it isn't. And this relationship that establishes between leadership and followers establishes, I think, something that we really need to set out from the outset, and that is that leadership is a relationship. It's not a relationship that's a distant authoritarian one. It's a relationship that involves a huge amount of give and take. And I'll come to this in a moment. So the first element of leadership that's critical is vision, by which I mean an idea, not necessarily completely worked out, but a concept, a thing you're trying to do. It may be an objective, it may be a goal, it may be sharing a view about the workplace or what you want the organization to do over the next year or 2 years or 5 years. And it's a way of being able to share that with other people so that it's no longer exclusively a private vision, a private idea, but it is an idea that starts with you. This is important because one of the things that I think defines leadership is that it does have to do with an individual who's able to take the time and the moment and the opportunity to reflect and to sit down and say, okay, what am I trying to do here? What am I trying to do? So I've got 3 things written down here on my page: vision, persuasion, feedback, execution, patience and persistence. Few ideas that are there. This isn't the first time I've given this talk, so I sort of know what I want to say. And the talk has changed because of the feedback and the comments that I've received from people saying you missed this or you missed that, all of which has been incredibly helpful. So we start with it, but it's me talking. This is not somebody else saying, this is the definition of leadership. No, it's me. I've worked this out. I've seen this done. I've also seen it not done. So if you go into a meeting unprepared, if you go into a meeting saying, I want to hear from everybody so I know what you think, I need just go in and say helplessly, I need your help. I need you to tell me where to go. That's not leadership. And it's very difficult for organizations to function properly without leadership, without the leader having a clue as to what they're trying to achieve and how they want to achieve it. Having said that, I think it's very important for us to come to terms with the fact that there are many, many different ways within an organization that different people can lead at different times. The same person doesn't need to lead everything. The same person doesn't need to be the person who's always in charge. A good leader is not a narcissist. In fact, narcissists are invariably terrible leaders for a whole lot of reasons that I'm glad to go into, because I think in politics you encounter some people who have profoundly narcissistic tendencies who are actually in the end not good leaders. And that becomes clear to everybody that they're not able to function in a group in which other people are being allowed to do things. A very significant part of what you need to be able to do as a leader in an organization is actually to empower other people. You need to really be able to give them the sense that not just the sense, but the reality that they're actually going to help get this done as well. Leaders are often coaches. Leaders are often people who recognize and see qualities in other people that they might not see in themselves and say, I think I'm going to let this person take over on this because she can actually do it better than I can. So I'm going to let her do it. But your job then becomes one of coordinating, of mentoring, of encouraging and giving the feedback that allows people to actually make that kind of progress themselves. The second great thing, once you go from the vision thing, as George Bush Sr. used to call it, you then have to talk about, well, how do I persuade? And the act of persuasion, again, is not a top-down exercise. The act of persuasion is one where you're actually sitting in a room with other people. Oh, and by the way, the true story, when I became leader of the Liberal Party, I said, get me a round table, get me a room where people can be sitting around in a circle. And people would say, why? I said, because the architecture of the room affects how people look at you. If you're up there on a dais, far away from anybody else, you immediately create the sense of aloofness, of separateness, of distance, which some people think is good for authority, but from my experience is terrible, because it immediately creates a sense that there's this large gap between leaders and other people, which is dysfunctional. The process of persuasion is not like saying, I have a vision, I've been up to the mountaintop, I've got the tablets, I'm bringing them down, and there's nothing to rework here. This is the final product, and I'm going to persuade you as to why this needs to be done. That doesn't really work very well, and the reason it doesn't is because it doesn't give in any organization that aspires to be democratic, it doesn't give people the opportunity to say, well, can we tweak this a bit, or maybe even more profoundly, that's a really terrible idea, and here's why, and you've got to think more about what you might do to get there. And in the process of persuasion, whether it's one meeting or 5 or 10 or 15 or a bunch of ways in which you are communicating and sharing, you are always relying on feedback and on the response. And it's not a one-way communication. It's a 2, 3, 5, 10, 15, 50, 150,000 ways of communicating and engaging with people. And that, I think, speaks to one thing that I was asked a couple of years ago when I was talking about leadership. Somebody said, "What's the most important quality in a leader?" And I thought about that for quite a while, and I said, it's the ability to listen, but it's more than just the ability to listen. It's the ability to absorb criticism without taking it personally and without overreacting to it, and being resilient in the face of it. Because that's a quality of a true leader, I think, is somebody who's able to accept criticism and realize that criticism is not actually about them, although it can be sometimes if you're trying to say, the way you dress, Bob, is just not going to help you get us to where we need to get to. You've got to smarten up. Pretty hard not to take that a little personally, but you do have to absorb it. But it's because it allows you to see that we're really talking about a document or an approach or a program or whatever the hell it is that is actually not you. It's this thing. And so you've got to be able to say, well, how can we improve this thing? Whether it's a drawing or anything else, you sort of say, how can we make this better? And in so many contexts, I've seen it difficult for people to have a conversation about how things could be improved or why what someone is saying actually doesn't really resonate with me or with somebody else. It makes it's essential that people feel free, that they can express themselves without having to follow a party line or tell the leader what a great job they're doing and how wonderful they look that day and all that stuff. That you can frankly just be yourself and just try to make a constructive contribution, not a destructive contribution, but a constructive contribution. And that is an essential quality in a leader, to bring that out in people, saying, no, I want to hear what you think. I don't want to hear what you think. I want you to think. I want you to tell me what you really think. And the ability of leaders to absorb that and then decide how much of it they're going to accept is, I think, the most exciting kind of people to work for, because you then realize that I can actually contribute to this process. I can be a leader too in the course of the process of going through this. And finally, we come to the issue of execution, and that's really where I think leadership draws much more at that point on some of the skills you learn as a manager. But leadership is not just management, because managers will just manage. They just say, well, how am I going to get through this thing, this process, this problem, this issue? And I have a way of doing that. I have an organization chart that helps me to do it. I can manage it through communication, everything else that has to be done. But the execution is critical for leadership, because frequently you get to stage one and then you get to stage two, and then you kind of, you lose interest, or it becomes harder to do. You then recognize how difficult it is to do. And then frankly, you realize, well, maybe the vision has to be adjusted. Maybe we need fewer commandments, not more. Maybe we should look at this one, because you're constantly listening for feedback to figure out, well, how are we going to actually get this done? And I think in most bureaucratic organizations that I've worked in, governments of one kind and another, frequently the execution gets botched. we don't get it resolved. We don't get to the finish line. We don't execute well enough so that we can say, this is the whole package of what my leadership is trying to achieve. And I think it makes it so critical for a leader to have a sense that management matters too, that actually being a good manager is not a bad thing for a leader. It can be very, very necessary and very helpful. And if as a leader you recognize that you're not a good manager, or you're not that interested in that part of it, then make sure you've delegated with full powers somebody who is, and somebody who's only too happy to say, yeah, I couldn't have thought of that idea by myself, and I really appreciate the vision, and I think I know how to help you get this done, because that's what I do better than maybe you do. So the patience and persistence part comes at every step of the way, because the vision isn't the product of immaculate conception. It doesn't just suddenly, you don't wake up one day with, I mean, maybe you do, but not very often. You've got to be sitting down, working, figuring out, how do I get to this idea, this concept of what I'm trying to achieve? And then, so it takes patience and it takes persistence to do it. There will be many mistakes along the way. And this is the last thing I want to say to you, and that is, failure is a good thing. It's not a bad thing. Failure is necessary in every organization. People who are willing to admit that they have failed make an enormous contribution to the success of a project. I have obviously have no difficulty doing this, because I can point to the same thing. Well, that was a mistake. And you say, fine, well, then fix it or learn from it. And I think one of the problems that people have is they think that failure is a person. It's not. Again, it's the picture in our heads. I have failed. You say, no, that's not. It's not about a personal thing. It's about the thing you were trying to do has failed. Not you, although there might be things you have to learn about yourself. But failure is not a person. Failure is an event. And it's only in trying things that we learn anything. It's only in saying, well, let's try this approach and see if it works. Doesn't, that's fine. Now, this can be difficult in a government, in any learning organization. You say, well, yeah, we can make a few failures, but if we can't just completely continue to botch things up totally. But it's very important to have this constant sense of persistence, that it's not persisting in doing the wrong thing. It's being willing to change the thing, but then to persist and not to give up. This whole concept of not giving up is not about repeating the same mistake over and over and over again until you get it, until you listen to me. I'm going to keep on doing it. You say, no, that's not what it's about. It's not about that. It's about something quite different. It's about not giving up on what we're trying to achieve, or what are we trying to do, or the worthwhileness of the overall mission or objective that a government or a manager, department, whatever might have. And I think it's very important to have that sense of how failure is Leonard Cohen's wonderful song, I'm sure you know it, where he says, there are no perfect offerings. There's a crack in everything. And that's where the light gets in. So one of the things I do as a leader is I have to continue to tell people that I'm not interested in perfection. The pursuit of perfection is a neurosis. It's actually counterproductive. And I'm obviously speaking from personal experience. I mean, many of you will know, I've been quite open about we only get to mental health by really talking about the periods in our life when we've been mentally not completely healthy and not completely well. And one of the things in my particular issue with mental health has often been being too hard on myself, and looking to perfection as the objective, which then prevents you from doing anything, because whatever you do is going to be less than perfect, and then you get caught up in a very self-destructive circle. And less dramatically than that, we often find people who are afraid to talk or afraid to speak up, because if they did, it might sound wrong or be less than perfect. It wouldn't be the perfect thing. And I think one of the things you have to learn to do as a leader is to create a circle where you recognize that listening is the most important thing, not talking, where you start from the assumption that you could be wrong, not that you're always right, that other people's views may be actually smarter than yours and better, and where you do everything in the organization to create the sense that you want to make people feel that the first two things are going to be allowed to happen. So the first thing is listening more than talking. And the second thing is admitting that you're human and that you could be wrong and that what you're saying could also be wrong. And that's what allows you to come out with something that could be even better than what you went in with. One of the things I've had to come to terms with is that most organizations don't allow for this. I mean, think of Parliament, if you like, as a place where somebody stood up and say, I could be wrong, but this is what I think. I don't think that's how they think, or where people are actually listening rather than talking over you, or just two ships passing in the night. You know, I've got my catchphrases, you've got your catchphrases. Let's repeat them over and over again for an hour, and then let's go out and talk to the media, which is what Question Period has become. There's no active listening going on in Parliament, which makes it very difficult for us to say this is a really healthy, functioning, democratic, way of doing things. I can remember a time, and I don't think I'm being, unrealistic or with rose-colored glasses. I can remember a time when actually people would go into Parliament. Sometimes they'd listen to what the other person was saying, and they'd say, "You know what? You're right. We got to do some more work on this and how we can improve things." And to be an effective organization, you have to be a listening organization. You have to be a learning organization. And that's where a number of things I think come in about the importance of diversity and inclusion, because the end result is always going to be better than if you don't do that. So having said what I've said, I'm going to shut up and listen and answer questions, but listen to you too. And really appreciate the opportunity to be with you today, and look forward to our dialogue. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Ambassador Ray. I loved what you had to say. It resonated so much with what we're seeing and what I personally aspire to as a leader. I want to start the conversation off looking at the connection between culture and leadership. So in my role at PwC as people and organization leader, I have a lot of conversations with senior leaders, and the topic of culture comes up so often. And in a recent study that we just completed, it actually was one of the top challenges. So maintaining morale, maintaining culture through the pandemic was one of the top challenges that are on people's minds. So what's your reaction to this? Are any ideas for the leaders that are on the call today around maintaining and cultivating a strong culture?
I think it's so important. I really do. And I've really benefited from joining this team here in New York, because one of the things that I realized as soon as I got here was I got here in August of 2020. So New York had been the epicenter of COVID in April. And the people that I was coming in to talk to lead had been in the middle of it for 6 months. And I'm not singing my own praises too much, a little bit, but one of the advantages of being beaten up as often as I have is you learn how to, that it's not about not about talking. It's not about you. It is about listening. So the first few weeks I did a lot of listening, and we created a world where people felt free to talk. And that was really important. And we also created an opportunity for people to say, and it's not only a place where I want to hear from you about your job, or I want to hear from you about this problem or this issue. No, I want to hear from you about you. So you really try to create a culture where people feel comfortable doing that, and where there's no taboo subjects, there's no issues that people can't raise either into the group or to me individually if they're not comfortable talking to others about it, and where we're all quite open and honest about our imperfections and our challenges. And so I've since going through what I went through as a young man in terms of mental health issues, I feel quite upfront about talking about them and sharing them with people, and trying to not just to make people feel better, but just so they don't feel that they're the only ones who are going through this, that we're all going through it. And we've done that ever since, to the point where some people said, do we have to do this? And I said, yes, we have to keep doing it, because otherwise there will be people who won't feel that we're actually responding. And I think it's really helped us. The other one is, again, I guess it's my embrace of imperfection, is saying we got to talk about where and how we work, because obviously nobody was in the office when I got there. So at some point you say, well, we're going to start to come back a little bit more. And as the UN becomes more of a place where people have to work, we kind of have to be there. So let's figure out how to do this. But it's always just listening to people who are who feel their voices, and also, frankly, to make sure you've got people around you in management positions who are not afraid of you, and so they're not afraid to come up and say, you know, that joke you told the other day didn't work, didn't go down well, wasn't well received, people didn't like it, and it made people think about this or that. And I think that's something you've got to be prepared to hear as a leader in terms of how you create that culture. But creating a positive culture that's not just rah, 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 but it's really based on how people feel about the job that they're doing, feel valued because they are valued and their views are valued, and not being uptight about letting everybody else get the credit for something, or making sure people are recognized. And these are all things that you learn along the way. But I think it goes against the grain of sort of the alpha male definition of leadership, where I've seen that in a lot of organizations in the past more than the present, perhaps, but you still see a lot of it. And these are not healthy learning organizations. They may look like it, but they're very brittle, and they often break apart when in a moment of crisis or real difficulty. And if you don't have that candor around your leadership team, and you don't have the candor around everybody, then you got a problem. And you really have to create that kind of a culture, and you have to work on it as a leader. Because the organization will often take its signal from you, and so you say, you know, here's what we're going to do. I'm comfortable hearing from you about this. Are you comfortable talking about it? And sometimes people say, no, I'd rather talk about it another way. You say, fine, we'll find another way to do it, but we just want to make sure people are valued, and that their perspectives are ones that really count. I also was never fussed about, people often said, oh, well, you've got to come back 3 days a week, or you sort of say, well, no, actually, we've just got to do it to the point where we can still do our work. And because we are a work organization, we're not a summer camp. So you say, you know, we do have to achieve some things. That's why we're here. But there are different ways of getting that end result that are a little less authoritarian than sometimes the old style of leadership might feel comfortable with.
Yeah, there's so many comments that I want to pick up on, and that certainly we're seeing that move to flexible working being something where leaders are very much having to pivot and learn new skills. The other parts of much of what you had opened with, and in your comments in this last question, were around diversity, equity, inclusion. And I want to pick up a question that was from the audience, from Stephanie. So she writes that some groups have more of an uphill battle to be accepted as a leader, so for example, the BIPOC community or women. And so, when you talk about the framework that you're working with and some of those elements you spoke to, is it different for those people where, there's a little bit more resistance to face in coming into those leadership positions?
Yeah, and you have to identify them quickly. If you're coming into a new organization, as I have here in New York, and really spend time figuring out how to address the gaps, and why some people feel very uncomfortable with the organization, or why they feel that they're never going to get anywhere. How do we make that change happen? There's still a long way to go, frankly, because a lot of the way governments work, as I've learned, is, pretty rigid kind of rules, that apply to everybody in every circumstance. And so I've had to do some things as an advocate for my staff or member of my team, have had to say, look, I know this is not what ordinarily is done in this situation, but we really need to make an exception here, because if we don't, we're not doing what we need to do to achieve justice, which is not that everybody gets treated exactly the same, but that the way we treat people reflects who they are and where they are and how they got there. And I couldn't help listening to the earlier panel and the comment from the guy from Logic talking about difficult conversations. We all have to have difficult conversations. We have to be comfortable with difficult conversations in offices these days. And I think a lot of people are not. A lot of people are not totally comfortable with them. And we all have a ways to go. I mean, I reflect the class and culture from which I came. So I can't change all of that, but I can continue to learn as an individual. And I believe that if you've got a heart and look on everybody as being human, and understand that there's all the other distinctions don't matter as long as we understand our common humanity, then we can we can learn and improve and fix how we respond. I mean, I have the advantage, I guess, and the diversity and inclusion. I never thought of anything any other way. Partly because of my parents and just the way I was educated and my background. I just never thought of not having a gender equal workplace, not having a race sensitive, not having a sexual orientation sensitive organization. I've been fighting these battles for all of my working life and even before that. So I don't feel uncomfortable understanding them or listening to them. But you're constantly trying to, I'm constantly trying to push back my own borders and boundaries in response to things that people say to me about something that I've just said, or some way in which I've expressed myself that shows that I don't fully understand the situation. I'll just tell you one brief story. I do tend to go on a bit, but the first meeting I had as a leader with Indigenous people, I thought the meeting went very, very well, and said as much to the person who'd invited me to the meeting. And he said, Bob, that was a terrible meeting. You were terrible. And if you keep doing it, you're just going to go nowhere with Indigenous people and with the issues that they have. I said, well, what did I do wrong? He said, well, first of all, you talked to him. First of all, you didn't pay respect to the elders. Second of all, you didn't start with asking somebody to say a prayer, asking somebody to say this. Third of all, you talked too much. And fourth, you cut the meeting off before people were really getting into talking. So if you thought that the meeting was about you and about your coming in and saying, I'm going to do this, 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 and this, thank you very much, and really good to see you. See you later. That ain't going to work. That's just not how it works. So I spent frankly, a lot of my time since then, instead of figuring out, okay, let's learn from that. Let's figure out how to do it better. And I still am like a white guy of a certain background and generation, and I can't change that, but I can learn. And I think it's you got to say the same thing to everybody else. You really have to learn, and it can be done.
Yes, thank you for that. So I want to again pick up on something you said just around the there being a leader often means wading into really tough issues and conversations. So one of the questions from our viewers today is, that first of all starts out with the admiration around your use of Twitter and really on how you've handled the topic of weaponization of the Canadian flag and the tactics used by protesters in Ottawa. So the question is, how can leaders reinforce the relationship between freedom and individual responsibilities to our collective well-being? I know that's a big question, but what are your views on that one?
Well, first of all, on Twitter, when Twitter first arrived, I didn't know anything about it, right? I mean, when it sort of was going on, my younger staff were saying, they were all on. I said, what the hell, what is this? And they said, oh, Twitter. I said, well, what is that? And what I ended up liking about Twitter, what I still like about Twitter is that, as far as I'm concerned, it's a very personal way for me to connect with whoever's picking it up. I like communicating, and I hate bureaucratic forms of communication. So, when I see a lot of my colleagues who put out Twitter accounts, and they say to me, well, how do you have 150,000 followers? And I said, I don't know. Maybe because I tell jokes, or maybe because I don't do what's predicted all the time, and the different things, and nobody promotes my Twitter feed. I mean, the government of Canada has a somewhat ambivalent attitude towards my Twitter communication. And the one thing I don't do is I don't get into, if I can possibly avoid it, I don't get into fights with people that are being disagreeable or come after me or whatever. And somebody will say, well, what do you think about this comment about you on Twitter? I said, I don't know, never read it. Or if I read it, I just ignored it. I think it's really important for us to have this discussion about freedom. For me, it's almost like a class in law and political philosophy. You say, yeah, you're free to do that, but then I'm free to do this. And what happens when rights collide? There's a wonderful man named Alan Borovoy, who for many, many years was the head of the Canadian Civil Liberties Association and a dear friend of mine. And Alan wrote one great book. He wrote a lot of books, but one really great book was called When Rights Collide. And what we're experiencing now with public health is rights are colliding. You say, I should be free not to vaccinate myself. And then you say, well, yes, but you're breathing on other people and you're connecting with other people. So if you're spitting out a virus, I kind of want to know about it. And I want to be able to protect myself, and I want to be able to protect my family and my kids. And we have these responsibilities that go together. It is complicated. I do feel badly, frankly, for people who can't see their way through this and just say, no, I got an angry comment the other day on Facebook from somebody who said, my 2-year-old grandchild has to wear a mask, and that's a horrible thing. And I thought, Well, I have 5 grandchildren. They all wear masks, and they're kind of used to it by now, and they seem to be doing okay. And I can understand if you're only 2, it's challenging, but this whole virus is challenging. It's hard for everybody, and so it's put a lot of stress on people. And I think we're seeing that, and I also think we're seeing some very sinister forces out there, frankly, that are taking advantage of people's stress and sense of insecurity. I think it's very important for everyone to hear their leaders say, we're all going through a hard time. And I don't know a family out there, my family is, I don't know a family out there that doesn't struggle with these questions and isn't exasperated by what's going on. But as I said the other day, if you say, well, I've had enough of this, you then say, yeah, but it hasn't had enough of you. And it's like, it's sort of like, would be like going outside in the middle of a snowstorm saying, I've had enough of this snowstorm. So what? It's still going to snow. So you got to deal with that. And that's, I think, is some of the challenge that we're having in connecting with people. But I think we really have to do a better job of expressing solidarity with people who are going through a terrible, terrible time, at the same time as not being naive about the forces at work that are trying to take advantage of these challenges and this how difficult this situation is.
So maybe just, picking up on that, and I think back, so PwC Canada recently launched a trust roadmap, and it's really to help organizations on their journey to become more resilient and sustainable and accountable. And when we look at our organizations, whether it be governments or business or, some of our very large institutions that we have in the past trusted, when we think about the concept of trust, we see that eroding, right? We see that many citizens are shifting to a sentiment of distrust. So the question to you is, why do you think we're seeing that pendulum swing? And as leaders, how do we rebuild that trust in our organizations, in our society?
That's a huge question. I mean, trust is an absolute foundation of living socially. So it's when trust goes or when trust is undermined, we all know in relationships, if somebody's lying to you that you thought was telling you the truth, you no longer trust them, and that has an impact on that relationship. So when people feel they're not being told the truth, that increases social mistrust. I think the other big factor in social mistrust is the system working for me, or is it not working for me? And in today's world, one of the things it is in a sense connected to some big social economic issues. I happen to think that the kind of capitalism, if you like, that we have today doesn't make for a whole lot of trust, because kids are leaving college, university with a huge amount of debt. There's big gaps. There's not only gaps between rich and poor, but there's gaps of opportunity. There's not as much mobility as there used to be, so that people feel, well, if I really trusted the system to reward me fairly for what I'm doing, I would feel better about things. I would have more confidence in the system. I think the way we would communicate with each other is lying plays a big part in communication, unfortunately. And a lot of things that I see, on Twitter or see in communication or even here at the United Nations are lies. And people seem to think that that's okay as long as it's for a bigger purpose, or it's kind of just a little lie. It's not such a big one. But when that starts to happen, then you've got a real problem. And the last one is what I talked about in my talk, which is execution. If you can't execute, then people lose trust in your leadership, and they lose trust in your ability to perform. And And that happens all too often. And that's why I think we should be spending far more time in talking about the importance of actually doing what you say you're going to do as being part of the exercise of creating an honest organization. And being an honest person is about doing what you say you're going to do and not doing what you say, you're not supposed to, just doing what you're supposed to. Don't bear false witness. Don't just follow the rules. Then there's much greater confidence in that. But when that breaks down, then there is a breakdown in trust. It's a very complicated issue because I think it's a mistake to think that there was a time, a magic time, when everybody believed everybody else. I don't believe that. I think that what's made for greater distrust today is probably the thing that I said about, is the system working fairly for me and for my kids, for my family, for my situation? And if you feel that it isn't, then you start to feel apart from and critical of, and then you respond to. I mean, populism feeds on these things, right? And it feeds on, there has to be some basis of fact for populism there has to be some truth to part of what people are saying that makes you feel that the system isn't doing, or that, and even the use of the word the system. You say, well, what system? You say, well, whatever system it is. And we faced a lot of problems too with ignorance and misinformation, just people not knowing or believing a whole lot as a result of social media. I'm not sure that you can blame social media, but I think the world that we're in creates greater distrust. I once asked my doctor what it was like practicing medicine compared to when he started as an older guy, and he said, "Oh, that's easy. It's the internet." He said, "You come in here and you start asking me questions about whatever results you've had, and they show me that all they indicate to me is that you've been reading a bunch of stuff which isn't true, and you've fallen for it. So now I have to take you back and say, no, this is what this means. It doesn't mean that, it means this." And so that's part of also what happens. We have a huge amount of misinformation floating around that might have been folkloric in other times, but now it's kind of systematic now.
Yeah, and I really enjoy your comments around, when we speak about trust, really say what you mean and then do what you say, right? It's
not that hard. It's not that complicated. It's much easier than people think. I mean, and I think we make it too complicated. And I mean, one of the things that I define my role at the UN is to try to tell the truth as much as I can, in as simple a language as I can, because I think it cuts through a lot of the BS that surrounds the discourse of the United Nations and of, frankly, a lot of politics. And I try to do that as much as I can, even though sometimes I get it wrong, and sometimes people don't believe me or whatever. But you just try to be as direct as you possibly can.
And I think those are wise words. And as we look at the questions from the audience, I think there's some desire to have some of those practical tips that we might get from you. So, one of our audience members, Michelle, is interested on some thoughts around strategic leading from the middle. Right. So often when you're in that middle management position, it's a lot of operational work. Right. And so how do you, there's overemphasis. How do you get that prioritization on strategic leadership? How do you do that from the middle?
Well, first of all, I mean, every organization, needs a middle, and every leader needs a middle. One of the ways in which the most effective leadership works is it's mediated by a lot of people. So one of the things that you try to do as an organization, you say, well, here's our 5 priorities for the year. This is what we're going to do. And you make sure that everybody has the priorities, everybody's watching, that the middle management knows them. In our COVID response, for example, here in the office, I originally thought, well, let's set out some rules and then we'll just distribute them and everybody will do what they're told. And it doesn't work like that. It's not how it works. So you have to really listen to what are people worried about? What are you hearing? And that's where middle management plays a key role. Is what are you hearing? Like, what do you, and you need to, if your leader isn't asking you that question, you should say, we really need to have a meeting with you, sir, or madam, we really need to talk to you and say, this isn't going to work this way. You've got to let us move ahead with it. The other thing I've learned how to do slowly is really trust the people who are actually responsible for the program, who are managing the program, and really let them do it. Let them run with it. Let them be it. And don't micromanage from the top. The truly dysfunctional organizations that I see, and in some cases work as part of a government, you can see that happening, are organizations where there's a very small group of people at the very, very top who are trying to basically think they can control everything and who are trying to manage everything, which means that there's so much stuff that doesn't get done because people feel disempowered, A, and B, because no 1 or 2 or 5 people can possibly exercise that degree of micromanagement. And I think, quite frankly, I had to make a lot of mistakes in my own life before I realized that. I mean, I always say to people, I was a much better premier in my last year in government than I was in my first year in government. Well, that's fine. I mean, of course, you learn. You don't do so much dumb stuff. You just figure out how to spend your time doing other things. But it took a while to get there. If there's anybody on the line who's worked with me, they'll say, yeah, a long time. Well, I'd say, well, doing the best I can.
So our time is drawing to a close. So maybe one last question. As you look back at your leadership career, can you think of a moment that you're most proud of?
Well, it's funny. There have been a lot, I would say. I mean, not because I'm tremendously self-satisfied or self-confident. I genuinely know, I think, what my weak spots are, and I know the mistakes that I've made. I would say there's a couple. One is that well, I don't know if it may sound like a strange story, but when I was struggling with my mental health issues as a young man, I didn't know whether I could get out of bed or whether I could do anything. And luckily I had good friends. They told me, you got to get out there. You got to do something. And so I said, okay. So I went to work in a housing and legal aid center, and I had an encounter with a woman who was very forthright and very determined about the situation facing as a tenant with her children, and she was just so strong and kind of, not an easy sort of client, but a really powerful person. And one night I got a call from her kids, said, you got to come to our apartment because mom's she's lost it. And so I said, what do you mean? So I said, okay, I'll come over. So I went over, and she was in terrible shape. And she was just not herself. So she was not herself. And we got her into the hospital, and a few weeks later, she came back to see me, and she was very direct with me. And she said, if you hadn't intervened, if you hadn't helped, if you hadn't done what you did, if you hadn't listened to me, if you hadn't taken me to this place, if you hadn't helped me, it wouldn't have happened. So how do I thank you? I said, you don't have to thank me. You did it all yourself. And we were both kind of very teary and very crying. And I realized that was one of the most important life lessons that I'd learned. One was I was learning how to think of her, not just think of me, which is one of the first things that creates a mentally healthy person. And the second thing was that I actually did have some skills that I'd kind of convinced myself that I didn't have. And so that sort of started me on my own personal road to recovery. So I've learned from that what I call taking the human footsteps, my grandmother's phrase that she always used to use with me, and just learn, just do it, just go ahead and take the steps and see where it takes you. If you go sideways, go back to the center and then do it again. In politics, I'd say I'm really proud of a few things that I've done that I think have been made a difference. I'm very proud of the advocacy and success I've had in leading a government that was very committed to equality and very committed to social justice, and made some difficult decisions in doing so. Ran a couple of good studies, one on Air India, one on learning and higher education in Ontario. The work I've done on advocacy for refugees has been tremendously valuable, and I think has helped to make a difference and helped to move things. And frankly, getting a political party, the Liberal Party of Canada, back on its feet was fun. I mean, I think they had to turn to an old NDPer. But the one thing I knew was, how do you lead a little small party, and how do you get them to stop thinking of what we used to have, and why can't we have it like the way we used to have it? And you sort of say, get over that, figure out how you're going to show a little bit of belief in yourselves, and then start to move forward. So yeah, there's a lot of things that that I feel have been a success, even though I think I could look at my political career and say, well, you were defeated as premier, you didn't make it as leader, and you haven't succeeded in the sort of things that people would say, well, that you didn't get to the top of the pinnacle, and quite frankly, I don't feel that at all. But I also recognize that there are a lot of other people out there that I've worked with that have huge talent, in some cases more talent than I did, and all the more power to them. I mean, because as I said, I've worked with leaders, and I found that the leaders that would listen to me and listen to others and not take it personally taught me a lot. And I've had a lot of advisors and counselors and people who had the guts and wherewithal, because I can be quite, I look a lot more self-confident than I really am. And people have been able to pull me aside and say, don't do that. Like, that thing you're doing, don't do that anymore. Do this. Think about this. And an ability to kind of really connect and help. So the idea that we do these things alone is just complete crap. I mean, the self-made people are an illusion. There are no self-made people. We all get to where we are because of others. And it makes all the difference, I think, to understand that.
And so I think we are at time, but with that, again, I think there's some huge wisdom in what you've provided to us. I think particularly over the past 2 years, probably likely all of us that are watching have had those challenges, big mountains in front of us, thinking that maybe we couldn't go on any further, we were stuck. And I think some of the advice you gave us today helps us put that, just do it one foot in front of the other, and setting up some of those building blocks to be that strategic leader that we want to be. We can do it, and we can persevere, and maybe not the way that we thought we wanted to, but there's always a really strong path in front of us and waiting for us if we have that discipline. So again, thank you so much for your comments today. Thank you to our audience participants and everyone that asked questions or input some ideas. We love to see those as well. Again, thank you to IPAC and for having me here as well. And before I sign off, just a quick plug to my PwC colleagues who will be leading a fantastic session later this afternoon on Workforce of the Future. So if you have a chance to take that in, I highly encourage you attending that one. And again, with that, we will sign off.
Thank you so much. Good to be with you. Really enjoyed it, Jean. Thank you for your participation, and thanks everybody for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you to UN Ambassador Bob Rae and Jane McClellan for your wonderful conversation on leadership. We're now heading into a 15-minute health break sponsored by National Bank. It will feature some short videos for your viewing pleasure. We will see you back at 12:30 Eastern at one of our 3 concurrent sessions. You will be able to make your choice by clicking on one of the links in the agenda tab. Session 1, should you be afraid of the dark? What Canada needs to consider as cyber threats evolve to target critical infrastructure. Session number 2, the world of work has changed forever. Now what? Session number 3, booster shot of confidence, celebrating 75 years of Canadian public administration. During the concurrent sessions, please ensure that your microphone is muted. This will help our AV technicians minimize any background noise. This conference would not be possible without the support of our sponsor, Deloitte, PwC Canada, MNP, Ted Rogers School of Management, Ryerson University, MAPCO, University of Waterloo, CPA Canada, National Bank of Canada, and the personnel. Please also take a moment to visit our partners section by clicking on sponsors on the left-hand side of your screen. And of course, please be sure to check out the networking lounge as well as to take a selfie to show us where you're tuning in from. Merci et à tout de suite.
Hello everyone. What a privilege to speak right after Mr. Bob Rae. I'll make a short promise. I am the Associate Vice President of a team of Pan-Canadian directors dedicated to government and public sector. For those of you who don't know us, our mission is to provide financial service for our public sector partners and employees. Every day, our specialized directors help various institutions manage their day-to-day business and realize major projects. We can provide support for cash management, short-term investments, or financing. We have extensive knowledge of all levels of government across Canada. It is truly inspiring to be part of this virtual event, full of visionary leaders and change makers. That's why National Bank is proud to be a partner of the IPAC Leadership Summit 2022. Through the pandemic, the bank continued to move forward to tackle risks and opportunities across the ESG spectrum. From talent development, employees' well-being, and inclusion and diversity, to minimizing our environmental impact and developing our roadmap to carbon neutrality by 2050. This event is in line with our commitment to creating a more sustainable future for all our stakeholders. That's why my team and I, we are proud to be part of this event today with you. Thank you and enjoy your health break.
What if we set out to build a better future for our children while taking care of our planet? Take action today, National Bank. What if we all set out to change the rules of the game so that tomorrow, everyone would have an equal opportunity to play? Take action today, National Bank.